the way that they describe this, and I think I remember the graphic vividly. It was on David Perel. He's a big writing guy on X now. Just an incredible guy. He said you have to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. So we had this graphic of all these dots on a screen. And you're like, what the hell is that? And then he connects them, and it ends up being like the outline of a dog or something. You're like, okay, I get it. This makes a ton of sense. You have to have all of these experiences, and only in hindsight can you actually connect them and make sense. But it's interesting to sort of reflect on those things. I think for everyone really, and anyone listening to this, think about those things. Think about where people have recognized you for your strengths, or think about the things that you've really enjoyed that maybe you've done a couple times over, and you're like, wow, I should probably lean more into that. I think that's going to set you up for success for sure.
Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabak, together with my co-host Terrence Orr, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description, subscribe to stay updated, and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together.
All right. What's cool about this episode is Adam and I sort of kept running into each other's orbits before we actually met each other, but the sort of current chapter, or at least the reconnection, started as one might expect at CES, where I was sitting on a random bus and chatting with a pretty nice gentleman who I just met, and telling him about my role that I was just rolling into as entrepreneur in residence, and we got to talking. And he was like, "Oh, that sounds exactly like a guy named Adam who happens to live in Kansas City." And I'm like, "What are the chances of that?" That's like that's got to be like a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 sort of level occurrence. And so Dave Merrill was his name, and Adam had worked with him in the past, and he really encouraged me to reach out. And it was really cool because it sort of started me on this journey of connecting with other EIRs, because Adam, I think, was maybe the first, but definitely the first 5 of kind of other innovation EIR folks that I spoke with. So Adam, super excited to have you on the podcast. And, ever since that point, we've had a lot of other touch points as well that we can dig into. But welcome. Maybe we'll start with, kind of going back to the beginning. Kind of your professional journey background is in kind of biology and processes and kind of biological engineering. So can you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe some of the things that drove you to, be excited and curious about that, and then we can kind of jump in from there.
Ever since I can remember, I've been interested in the stuff that we can't see. And if I had to guess, there's two things I remember happening very early in my life that sort of set me on this trajectory of microbiology and bacteria and the science of stuff that impacts us, but we, again, physically can't see. So I remember getting a microscope as a kid, very young, like maybe 6 or 7, one of those little plastic cheapos with the mirror reflector on it, and you could do cuts of leaves and whatever else you want to put under there to check that out. I remember being fascinated by that. And then the other one was a hand washing experiment in elementary school. So we had a teacher that put together, she made these Petri dishes, and I'm pretty sure she used instant potatoes, like the dry mix, and then mix it with water. And then she sent kids into the bathroom and said, okay, right, some of you aren't going to wash your hands. Some are going to wash with just water, some with soap and water, whatever, and came back. And, of course, 3-4 days later, these Petri dishes are just growing all sorts of disgusting stuff. So I remember just being fascinated by that. And when I decided to go to college, that's what I ended up studying, because I thought I was going to go to medical school afterwards. Obviously, that didn't happen. And I'm sure we'll probably get into that a bit. But again, as far as I can remember, like science and sort of that tech, call it geeky route, whatever, that's always been a part of my journey.
No, that's amazing. And we found, like, as we talked to folks, a lot of the formative things that they were excited about, things that they were drawn into, maybe like a mentor that they've had, kind of have a long timeline impact on what they get into. So I guess not a huge surprise there. Maybe jumping from there, actually let's before we jump, you shared in sort of the prep with us that, you kind of had an early entrepreneurial experience in college, and were involved in some of the stuff at K-State. So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about that, because it sounds like it was sort of an early insight into a different world.
It was mind opening. I had been spending whatever. I think I worked in a lab probably 2 hours a day on average. Had spent most of my time obviously in hardcore science classes where we're cutting and splicing DNA and playing with bacteria and studying pathogens and all this stuff. And so my whole world was science, and all the people that I knew that were in my classes were also science. So all of them were either going to medical school or they're going to grad school to get another degree in something science and maybe going to work in a lab. And so I never really thought about what private enterprise would look like, and definitely hadn't thought about what entrepreneurship meant. I don't even think I could have spelled entrepreneurship if you would have asked me to in college. So one of my fraternity brothers was in the College of Business, and he had entered what was at the time the very first entrepreneurship challenge. Like, I think they called it like the big pitch or like the rocket ship, whatever, right? Something like that, whatever play on words you want to use for those types of things. And he was going to enter it with his business plan that he had developed working at a Papa John's. And I'll explain that here in a second. And he knew that he wasn't the most charismatic person, not the best speaker. He knew that I had some of those skills, interestingly, from years and years of debate in high school that I think led me to sort of enjoying, public speaking and sales, if you will. And he's like, look, I'll write everything about this business plan. I'll come up with the product. I'll even manufacture these things if you will just come and present to the judges and wow them. And I literally almost laughed him out of the room. I was like, dude, I literally know nothing about business. My dad was a military guy. My mom was stay at home for the most part. She worked in education a little bit. No one I knew in my immediate network that I was close with ever talked to me about business. And so I was like, why me? And he's like, dude, literally all you need to do is just go pitch and present. So he came up with this idea that when you're in a Papa John's, it kind of looks like a Subway or a Chipotle in the back where all the ingredients are in bins next to one another. And when you're making pizza, there is a big quality challenge when you're making them really quickly. When you're putting cheese on and then pepperoni on and olives and whatever else, all these ingredients start to get mixed into the other bins. Huge cross-contamination problem. And obviously for people that ordered one thing and maybe got something else, like a vegan gets a piece of sausage on the pizza, right? They're up in arms. And this happened all the time. So he made these dividers that sat in between the bins to keep the ingredients from mixing with one another. It was super simple. Don't know why it hadn't existed before. We presented at this pitch competition. We ended up winning. And so here I am standing on a stage with this, whatever it was, $5,000 or $10,000 check, thinking, holy shit, this is more money than I've seen my entire college career working in this lab. Like, what is this entrepreneurship thing? Like, what is this business thing? And that just sort of like set the course for opening the aperture to what my future career would look like. And so I owe a lot to him and to that entrepreneurship competition for, quite frankly, putting me on the light path.
This is very interesting, Adam, because this is not the first time that you did this. This was the first time you did this, but then you did it again, right? And you did it again in grad school on a bigger stage, right? More people that would expect more of you as a grad student than somebody in undergrad.
Right.
Tell us about that competition and what happened there.
Yeah, it's hilarious because that happened. Then of course we'll get into the robotics thing at GE, right? So so in grad school they had I got my MBA with a focus on entrepreneurship, and they held a pitch competition that was like, again, like the rocket pitch or whatever. And I entered with two of my other business school colleagues, and we came up with this idea because we had all been in the professional world for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer before we went to grad school. And business travel is always a pain. So anyone that travels for business, if you don't do it, you think it's glamorous. You're like, oh, you get to go to Paris. Like, that's amazing, right? I fly to Brazil regularly. We have a bunch of customers in Brazil. Oh, you get to go to Brazil. Like, that must be amazing. I'm like, literally, I sit in a plane for 10 hours. I'm tired as hell. I get off. I get into an Uber. I go straight to a hotel. I might have to freshen up, or maybe I crash if I'm lucky. I deal with jet lag. I go straight to meetings. Might have a good meal every now and again. And then I'm back in an Uber, back in an airport, heading back home. Right? It's not like I get to kick it by the beach and go hang out with friends. That's just not business travel. And so one of the things I was thinking about was, well, all this travel, it's a lot of Airbnb had sort of just come around at that time. And so I was like, there's got to be a way for businesses to save money when their employees are traveling on business and to be able to use people's homes to do it. Like, why isn't there an Airbnb for business travelers? So the concept we came up with was to have networks of intra-company employees host one another when they're traveling. So as an example, if I live in Kansas City, I'm traveling to Atlanta for the week or whatever, and Terrence is willing to host me in his house, right? The company will spend, call it 50% less than they would for a hotel. You'll get compensated based on that delta. I'll make some money based on that delta. It saves the company money. We get to establish a relationship as coworkers, like win all the way around. And so we entered that competition. We won that competition. And again, it was like, if that's not a sign from the universe that I need to do something entrepreneurial, then I don't know what is. And then the rest is history, as they say.
That's amazing. I mean, I think that what's interesting to me and just kind of listening to you talk through it is, at least from my experience and lots of folks I talk to, like the path from the starting point out doesn't make any sense, but sort of looking back, especially in a conversation like this, where, you know, we can dip into undergrad, graduate, sort of first role in the working world, and then sort of where that's led you. It's sort of easier to pick up on the signal through, you know, kind of what's the through line. And so it's just, you know, even like the debate thing, right? Being able to sort of decompose what the real kind of drivers for an issue are, and then thinking about what are we trying to do here, whether it's convince or defend against, or it is actually like a really powerful tool that you don't think about. You know, I did, for example, a lot of improv training because I was doing an NSF fellowship when I was in grad school. And like, I do now, but I didn't really appreciate, like, you know, what that opened up. And even to your point about, you know, being in deep science and not knowing anybody outside of deep science, like folks that haven't been in deep science don't understand, like, what's that like? What are the motivations? Why do people do what they do? And so, you know, I think there's a lot of value in sort of thinking about, you know, and being able to even appreciate kind of that input. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that before we move on.
I want to double down on this skill because it sort of speaks to sort of, there's a direct correlation between sort of being a good storyteller, right? And commanding sort of a room, if you will, you know, with his public speaking skills, understanding how to answer a question or, you know, objections from people, you know, if you will, from his skill in debate. These things carry over well in the role of entrepreneurship, but you just don't know that, right? When you start, right? It just seems like a thing that you're good at, right? Somebody else had to notice his superpower before he noticed it, right? And once he got a hook, like, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this, he did another competition. He won that one too. And then it was sort of validation, right? And then Adam was like, okay, like, this is my sign, my calling from the universe. I'm good at storytelling. I've won these things twice at the undergrad level and at the graduate school level. And now his life is about to happen. Real life is about to happen. And he's going to move into getting into one of the most competitive programs that you can get into for an experienced person leaving an MBA program. Adam, can you talk us through, where did you go next?
Yeah, definitely. You know, on that point, I heard a really interesting phrase about this idea of connecting the dots. And the way that they describe this, and I think I remember the graphic vividly. It was on David Perel. He's a big writing guy on X now. Just an incredible guy. He said you have to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. So we had this graphic of all these dots on a screen. And you're like, what the hell is that? And then he connects them, and it ends up being like the outline of a dog or something. You're like, okay, I get it. This makes a ton of sense. You have to have all of these experiences, and only in hindsight can you actually connect them and make sense. But it's interesting to sort of reflect on those things. I think for everyone really, and anyone listening to this, think about those things. Think about where people have recognized you for your strengths, or think about the things that you've really enjoyed that maybe you've done a couple times over and you're like, wow, I should probably lean more into that. I think that's going to set you up for success for sure. So on that same sort of thread, so in between my first and second year of graduate school, there was a case competition, and General Electric was a massive company at the time that had divisions from, right, like transportation, aviation, healthcare, you name it, power and water, et cetera. And we entered this case competition and competed against like 5 or 6 other business schools on the West Coast. And if you won this case competition, then you got to interview for GE's summer internship program, which was, in my case, the Experienced Commercial Leadership Program, or also known as ECLP. So on the prep call, we talked about GE has a number of these sort of developmental rotational programs. Terrence alluded to one called CAS, which is Corporate Audit Staff, which was a feeder from I think it was some sort of other financial leadership program like FMP or FLP or something like that. So it's basically a way for, if you looked at the history of all the GE executives, like the folks that went from sort of director level all the way to CEO, 9 times out of 10, if they were from inside the company, they had gone through one of these programs. And almost everyone that's graduated from those programs has gone on to become a CEO or CFO or whatever somewhere else. So we ended up winning this case competition. I got to interview with GE, and the division that they were like, well, what's your background? What do you think would most align with GE's priorities? And I was like, I mean, I did a lot of microbiology, like maybe healthcare. And they were like, we don't have any opportunities in healthcare. They're like, how about water? And I was like, sure, why not? So I interviewed for the water division with a guy named Ralph Exton, who I adore. He's an incredible mentor of mine, was just a tremendous boss, super well networked in the water industry. And quite frankly, ended up taking a swing on me. I didn't have any background in water. He was willing to hire me on. So I worked for GE the summer between my first and second year of grad school. And then after grad school, went to join them full time as part of that rotational program.
Man, there's something to be said about people taking a shot on people, taking a shot on potential, and not just your resume today, but who they think you will become, based off of some interaction that they've had with you or something that somebody has said about you. And I think everybody owes somebody in their career something for taking a shot on them when technically we wasn't ready for it, right? And they took a shot and somehow we rose to the occasion. Somebody took a shot on me. That's how I got into tech, right? Building data center products, right? But before that, I was working in hospitality, right? But I would say the skills that I got from hospitality was being a service-driven leader, right? Learning how to lead with service in mind, about the customer, around everything else. And that sort of carried me and followed me throughout the rest of my career. So it's really nice to hear that somebody took a shot on you, got you into the water sector, right? But look at you now, Adam. You're doing interesting things. And I always think the people who take the shots on us, they want to be able to look back and think, that was a good shot. That was a good bet. Right. And now you just want to pay that forward. I'm going to back up and rewind a little bit before we continue in the story, because you were paying it forward well before you started building things. Right. Talk to us about the time that you spent in Mexico, right? As a volunteer at an orphanage, and how that impacted you and followed you out to the rest of your career, about a life of service.
Man, for whatever reason, I probably owe it to my parents. They always said, leave the world a better place than what you came into it. You have an obligation to give, if you can, either your time, talent, or your treasure. Everyone has something to give. I don't care who you are, what status of life you're at, what your background is. Everyone has something that they can give to somebody else. And I always wanted to experience different cultures. I enjoyed learning new languages. So in college, I lived in Mexico for a summer and volunteered in an orphanage down there as part of, it was sort of an exchange program of sorts, but we lived down there full time and spent our mornings in the orphanage and then our afternoons at a bilingual community center teaching English classes. And it's interesting, there's another thread there later on in life when I moved to Brazil too, where I recognized that, happiness and fulfillment have very little to do with your job and how much your title or how much money you make. Really, the things that are most important are your health, the health of your friends and family, that you have people that love you, people that you love, and the ability to provide something of value to your community or to your customers or whoever it is that you're interacting with. And so I saw it in Mexico, kids that were living on dirt floors that didn't even have a pencil to do their homework with. Some of the happiest kids I've ever seen in my life, right? Kicking a duct tape ball down the street. I saw the same thing in Brazil. I've seen the same thing when I've traveled to other countries that are quote unquote developing. And it really makes me wonder, like, are they the ones that have their priorities straight? Because a lot of folks, they talk about like, oh, one day when I retire, one day when I make all this money, or one day when I get X, Y, or Z. And you're like, okay, what are you going to do? They're like, oh, well, I'll kick back and spend time with my friends and family. It's like, you don't need to make $1 billion to do that. You can do that anytime you want. So that has carried through with me, almost everything. And I always think about like anytime there's a challenge at work or a challenging situation, it's like, man, this isn't life or death. We're going to be all right. Some people do have careers where it's life or death. That's a different story. But for me, it's like I sit in an air-conditioned room all day staring at the screen. Like, life is not bad. In fact, it's really good. So I just count my blessings every day and remind myself that this is all we have is the present moment and to enjoy it.
I just got to jump in there for a second. I think I really like the collect the dots, connect the dots, but the thing I would add there, or not but, and, the thing I would add there is I think there's some algorithms and some sort of behaviors that allow you to get a much wider cross section of dots, right? And I think one of them is kind of taking the leap, looking at the opportunity. Another one is, kind of thinking about what don't I know that I don't know, right? And thinking about maybe who's ahead in the journey. There's a couple, I didn't consider them this way, but sort of they're almost algorithms in how I make, and actually Terrence and I have dug into this one. Anything that's making you anxious, sort of run toward that. Don't run away from it, because there's normally some tension and there's a reason why you're feeling that way. But it's sort of collecting the dots isn't just like, looking at what are the things I can do, but also sort of manifesting some of these things, right? And it's, as you were kind of talking through it, I think it's an important addition, somebody taking a leap on you or kind of a bet on you where maybe they shouldn't have. But the thing is, you still have to lean into that, right? And you have to take the opportunity, and you have to have sort of the clarity of mind to really absorb that, hey, not, being locked in your head about what are you going to do on the next step of your career when you get back from Mexico, but actually being in the moment and seeing that, hey, your new friend or, the kids that you're working with are having a, completely different experience. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out, because I think it's the process of collection is actually really interesting, and we'll probably expand on this. I have a feeling this collect and connect thing will become something that we revisit. But I just wanted to point out that I think part of it is, what you know, but there's a lot of things that you don't have exposure because, nobody can give you that perspective. And there's some things you can do to sort of expose yourself to more. And I think that's a kind of important part of the process.
Yeah, I think this idea of sort of taking the leap or adaptability, which, you had in school when the guy asked you to pitch, you did it again, right? For another competition. You did it early on before you even got to that stage in your life. When you went out to Mexico, that was already a leap, and then somehow you ended up in a career where you need to be on a plane going back and forth to Brazil, right? And thinking about your formative experiences from what you remembered in your early days and letting that sort of carry you throughout. I think those experiences give people sort of exposure leads to you knowing things and giving you perspective about things to help you lead better as a CEO, as a founder, as somebody who will have people reporting to them, right? And understanding that it could be a lot worse. I've been in way worse sort of scenarios and situations, and to sort of, how do you lead from the front that way? And I think that's a very important part of, starting anything, leading people, inspiring people along the journey and the mission that you have, in building anything new. But you managed to do this, Adam, inside of a company, like GE for your first like massive swing, talk to us about you being a venture leader, inside of GE, knew nothing about water. By the way, people, let me remind you guys before we move into this, knew nothing about water before this. Okay. Got into this, drinking from the fire hose, and now he needs to lead a new venture. Talk to us about that part.
Again, looking backwards, connecting the dots, I had so many run-ins with water over the years, especially in my microbiology training. So it's interesting. My first job out of college was a quality engineer for General Mills. So I was responsible for making sure that the food that we produce was safe for people to consume. And safety is a function of a couple different things, but one of them is how the absence or presence of water and the manufacturing process can lead to the growth of all sorts of nasty, disgusting things. So counterintuitively, General Mills, actually went to many different manufacturing schedules where they would run continuously for like 3, 4, 5, 6 days without cleaning, because bringing water into the process would actually create more harm than it would do good. And it's you don't really think about it that way, but that happened to me. I had some really interesting experiences with water living in Brazil, of course, traveling internationally, you think about it all the time, right? Do I have this raw fruit? Do I eat this raw vegetable? Just clean in water? Does it have the water have ice or not? Blah, 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 blah. Of course, we all use water every day too. So the first thing we do in the morning, usually go to the restroom, brush our teeth, make coffee, whatever, right? All has to do with water, but no one's thinking about it. No one's thinking about it. It's out of sight, out of mind. Fortunately, our water utilities here do a pretty good job of keeping things on. So you turn on your tap, you get water, you flush your toilet, it goes away. When you don't have to think about it, you just don't, right? When the service is good. So I became really interested in this whole concept of water and what it takes to make water work at a societal level. And so that was my interest that sort of carried me into my venture role at GE, which was looking at early stage water companies that were bringing digital technology into the ecosystem, because water was and still is many ways probably 20 years behind any other major industry in terms of technology adoption, and seeing who we wanted to cut checks into. So I was working with GE Ventures, I probably looked at 150, 200 different, they call it at the time as digital water startups, thinking about where do we want to invest? How do we want to expand the portfolio of GE solutions in the water space? And through that, I engaged with a bunch of different utilities in the US, because for every entrepreneur that came to the table, I'm like, okay, great. You're going to sell me whatever bill of goods you want to sell me and tell me that it's going to be $1 billion company if I could only get 1% of the market and right, all this other crap. What do your customers have to say? That's ultimately who matters. Who's cutting the check and are they going to pay you or not? That's it. And so I engaged with a ton of the end customers. In a lot of cases, those were the US water utilities. And so I came across a bunch of really interesting problems, one of which I could bore you with stats all day, but one of my favorite stats is, at that time, this is more than 10 years ago at this point, but roughly 30% of all of the United States water that was treated and being sent to an end customer, that could be a home or a business, 30% of that water was lost in between the treatment plant and the end customer, gone. So that could be from leaks, it could be from theft, it could be from inaccurate metering. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that might be the case. But think about that when we talk about, all the, taps are running dry, our wells are running dry, right? You see these sort of clickbaity headlines with the lake levels dropping and these, sunken boats from the 1800s reappearing, all this stuff. You're thinking like, well, how in the hell could we be losing 30% of our clean water? Where's that stuff going? And so I sort of stuck that in the back of my head and thought, that's a really interesting set of problems that maybe one day I can work on. And then that, of course, led me into my next adventure.
Oh, man. So many threads. There's one, I'm drawing this sort of, at first on the surface, I thought, okay, Adam is our first water guy, expert, can go deep. But then when I started to drill out, you're sort of thinking about the relationships and the people who have. I'm thinking right now as you're talking, whoa, we had another EIR on the show who's a chief product officer for a water company, water treatment sort of company, MK, for a short while. And then we have Jen, who's starting a water company right now, more on the retail side around clean water and fresh water from around the world, which another EIR who's at Shutter Hill Ventures, right? And then we have Janine, who lives in Brazil half of her time, right? And moonlights between back and forth in the US. So I'm sitting here thinking I can't wait to get these guys in a room together. Just so they can talk water and travel and adaptability and the journey of sort of being an EIR, but just thinking about all the things that you just went through just now. One, I'm noticing the trend that you tend to like to help companies grow with names that start with General at the beginning, whether it's General Mills or Electric. Let's just start there, right? And have created a ton of value inside of those companies in many of ways. But you took that value and translated that value to going outside of GE, right? At some point, great things happen. You built the company. Great outcomes happen as a result of that. And now you're at this stage where, what are you thinking, right? You go on to do a few other things before you start Transcend, but why? What were you thinking at the time when you left GE?
Couple things. So I had just sold the startup that we spun out of GE, and I loved that journey. It was a ton of fun. I found out the things I'm really good at, the things I'm not very good at. I learned a lot about the venture ecosystem that I didn't even understand, having come from my time at GE Ventures. And I met a lot of super cool entrepreneurs, Dave Merrill included, who is the one Ilya referred to that introduced us. And so I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I wasn't sure what and how. And I got a call from a former colleague at GE Water, who they had then been purchased by a company called Suez. And they were like, hey, we're setting up the smart cities division in the US. Suez is based in France. They're literally the ones that built the Suez Canal. That's how they got their name. For a lot of folks who don't know them, they're a massive company, huge French company. And they have a really cool smart cities program in Europe that they wanted to try to copy and paste here in the US. And they're like, we want you to lead that. And I really had to think about that because I enjoyed the entrepreneurial journey. I was thinking back to my days at GE in some cases, definitely General Mills, where I was like literally in a cube sitting in meetings that I was just wasting my time and everyone else was too. And thinking about all the corporate crap that I just hated. I was like, man, do I really want to go to a big company again? I don't know if I can cut it, but the role was going to be super entrepreneurial. So it was just me, ragtag, running around, thinking about how can we make this happen, right? The technology was there. The funding was there. They were sort of willing to give me carte blanche to say, hey, go build this thing how you want it. And so I was like, you know what? Even if this is a stopgap, it'll be a really cool stopgap where I can learn a lot. So that's why I went to work for Suez. I made it 12 months, almost 12 months to the day, and couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I had to go back to the true entrepreneurial route. So, and I'm glad I did. I'm very glad I did. Also very fortunate for my colleagues at Suez because they're an amazing bunch. They really are. And they're doing really cool work. It's just that when you're in a big company, it's something I've also learned building Transcend now through Series B and a lot of financing, is that you have to start to layer in processes and systems that slow things down. There's just no way around it. Like you can't keep that sort of ragtag maverick, crazy founder mode hat on through the life cycle of the company. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to hire teams, right? People have to be managed. You've got to have different layers of approval. You certainly hope to keep it flatter and faster than a big organization, but you still have to have it. And so at the time, I just abhorred all of the corporate just bullshit that I had to deal with all the time, and the layers of approval and how slow everything was. It just pissed me off. But it's also sort of a necessity when you're that big of an organization. And I've never seen a big company that doesn't have that stuff. So it makes me think it's not a flaw. It's just how the system is designed. And that's just the way it works.
So something happened in between there. Something happened in between this where you got more ingrained in water again, after Suez, and, you go on and you co-found, right, Transcend, and you're doing what you're doing now. And I think what you just said now, I think is a very, very, very important point for individuals who do not get the privilege to make it to Series B, right? Like yourself, right? And beyond, I'm sure, right? They don't really understand the fact that at some point you grow up to be an adult as a company. You don't stay an infant or a toddler forever where you can run around and do what you want and fly under the radar and people don't mess with you. At some point, you're a big kid on the block and people start to notice you. And now you have to tighten up your operations and everything else in between, your systems. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Adam? What it takes to make that leap from a Series A company, which you're in the early stages to, now you're into growth stage around B and C, and how that's very different for you as a founder and how you operate.
It's completely different. At least it has been in my experience. And to be honest, it's something I still struggle with. Every single day, it's a struggle for me because my mindset is just get shit done. You might piss some people off along the way. The things may not be 100% perfected and whatever else, but you just need to get it done. You respond quickly. That's just the way things work. And that's not our company anymore, right? Our company is processes and systems, because that is how you grow scalably. And I think the key word there is scale. So the things that I do don't scale well. They don't. So I have to work with people who are operators, who are system builders, who are process people that enjoy that stuff. That's the other thing that's interesting, is that there's a lot of stuff that I hate doing, and then I'm sure we could all talk about things we hate doing that other people would love to do. I'll never forget, I had a conversation with a woman once who, we were talking about what we do. She works for a water utility in the UK, and I was like, yeah, what's your plan? She's kind of earlier on in her career. I'm like, oh, what are you planning to do? I was thinking maybe we could hire her in the UK. We're expanding there, whatever. And she's like, my dream job is to manage a schedule for a CEO. And I was like, damn, you couldn't pay me $1 million a year to do that. There is no way. But the way she talked about it, she was so passionate about it. And I'm like, this is insane. I can't even fathom. So keep this in mind. Couple this with another book that I read, which is actually a recommendation from my COO, and it's called Who Not How. And there's this, you guys actually alluded to it earlier, like if you're feeling anxiety, right, run towards it, go towards the pain. And generally, I agree with that sentiment. Like, you definitely got to go towards the pain. Have that conversation that might be scarier that you're not willing to have, right? That's because that's where progress happens. That's where growth happens. It may also, though, be a time to reflect and think about, is this just something that you just don't want to do? Like, you just either don't enjoy it or you're not good at it. Who can you find that does enjoy it or that is good at it? Because those people do exist. And so if you're procrastinating on something or you're feeling anxious about something, think about who you can bring into the fray that will help you get things done. And I'd say that's been the biggest transition from that sort of early stage, seed series A company to a B and later stage growth, is you got to bring in more people that do the things you either don't like to do or that can get you to scalability, because that's the real key, is the scalability piece. And it all comes down to people and processes, but people for sure.
One thing I'd sort of point out that kind of caught my ear when you were talking about it, I think that sort of deep dive around what water is and how it gets to people is like, and being able to be in an environment where you have both deep expertise and a broad platform to sort of really appreciate what that means kind of end to end is actually like a really powerful narrative foundation to build from. And one of the things I love about being a startup founder in the times that I've done it is that you're much closer to the ground, much closer to the kind of customer, right? There's just less distance between you and the market and the technology and all these things. And having the ability to layer in sort of that view, what are we doing here? Where could it go? Is actually like an amazing, because as I think about, kind of the entrepreneurial operating systems or the frameworks that you have to install in order to get from 1 to 60 to 200 to 1,000, right? Somebody still has to own the story. There's still, can you be very sort of reactive and be able to support the marketplace as it evolves, and can you sort of deliver on the things that you're saying you can deliver on? But I think that narrative, that foundation for kind of the vision of what are we trying to do here, right, and where does the world go if we're successful, it is super interesting and important. And so you sort of you didn't exactly mention it in passing, but I think folks that I know that have had a period of time to spend in an organization and on a topic that they really sort of fall in love with the area and the problem, often become, sort of probably some of the best able to motivate, teams and build companies to really attack these problems. So there's just
no
wanted
question.
to kind of highlight that.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
We ran through it quickly.
I mean, you go through a lot of hard stuff as a founder. I mean, a lot. It's like the world's craziest roller coaster ride, where the highs are really, really high and the lows, you're like, we're crashing and burning and we're all done. Like there's no pulling back from this one. And so to be able to level that out, I found that like that gap between the peaks and the troughs is really flattened when you have a strong mission and a strong purpose, and that's across the org. And so for us, in our case, everyone, sometimes we haven't talked about what we do, but every time someone runs into a design or project using our software, we know that there is a percentage likelihood that someone in the world is going to get access to clean water or renewable power because of it. That's it. And we've measured that since almost day one of the company. And so if you go to the front page of our website, you scroll maybe a third of the way down, you're going to see we've impacted over 400 and probably 10, 15 million people at this point around the world with our software. That's what keeps me going. Every day in my inbox, I get a notification every time someone runs a design. And it's almost like you're in a high, like a, almost like Wolf of Wall Street or some sort of high stakes sales environment where like they're ringing the bell every time an order comes in. That's how I feel when I see someone run a design art software. I'm like, that's what it's all about. That's why we do the work that we do.
Man, that's because you're tying that impact back to not just profits. It's just, here's the impact that happens when you use our software. If you use it, I know, right? Somebody has gotten some impact and some value out of using it. Back up a little bit, Adam. Tell people exactly like what is the company that you run today, that you started, and make it real for them. Give them a use case or a scenario in a way that somebody would be using, your software.
So we'll keep it to water for now, right? The platform is much broader than water, but I think it'll be instructive for folks listening to this. So generally speaking, if you live in any sort of major metro, your water is treated at a central treatment plant. And when you flush your toilets or turn on your tap or the water goes down your shower drain, it also goes to a central treatment plant. Those are two distinct entities. You have a drinking water treatment plant and you have a wastewater treatment plant. Those are very different, and certainly in terms of how they smell, but also in terms of how they operate and the type of technology, and quite frankly, whether or not someone wants to live close to one. You don't mind living near a drinking water plant. You don't want to live anywhere near a wastewater treatment plant. So our company was built on this foundation of we want to build better infrastructure. In most cases, our wastewater infrastructure is in horrible shape. The American Society of Civil Engineers rates it. I think it got a D this year. It's been like C+ at best for like the last decade. So we're spending billions, if not trillions of dollars a year pumping it into our water infrastructure, and we're still getting horrible ratings and reviews. And so there's clearly something wrong there. And we believe that the reason is that we're not spending enough time when we plan this infrastructure in the first place to build the right stuff from the beginning. So if, like I said, if you're in a town where your water is being treated centrally, your wastewater is being treated centrally, some point that had to be built and constructed. And chances are, if you're somewhere where there's a growing population, another one of those is going to have to be built. But how big should it be? How many people are going to move into the area? What if a big battery manufacturer, which just happened in Kansas City, decides to move in 5 years after it's constructed? What does that do to the wastewater, right? Can it handle that amount of wastewater? What if the population doesn't grow as expected? What if the climate changes in 20 years and we get a bunch of rainfall that we didn't expect, and that impacts all the water going into the treatment plants, right? People aren't taking the time to assess all the variables because we just don't have the time and money to do it. So the people using our software are the ones who are responsible for planning and designing and constructing these systems. And we're basically giving them a crystal ball. What we're telling them is, hey, here are the things that you're thinking about now when you want to plan and design this infrastructure. And here are the things that you're going to be thinking about in 20 or 25 years. Let's figure out the sweet spot in what you should be building and make sure you're making the most capital efficient decisions, operational efficient decisions, use of land, right? All these different variables you got to consider. Let's make sure you have the data up front to be able to do that. So effectively what our software does is give all of the stuff that engineers do today manually. It does it automatically at a conceptual level and pumps out a complete data package so that the folks that are looking and making these decisions have all the data they need with all the variables they want to account for and all of the different technologies and innovations that are in the sector to be able to say, hey, this is the one we want to choose. And it's this because, right, it's the lowest cost, or it's going to last the longest, or it's going to be the one least likely to break down in 20 years, or right, whatever that might be. That's what we're doing for people.
And maybe just to add, because, that seems pretty kind of a cool thing. But normally, people are looking at one design or maybe two designs. I would say three, but that's just not reality, right? And so instead of looking at one or two based on sort of a lot of filtering and professional experience, maybe you can look at 30 or 300 or 3,000, right? And then that starts to say, hey, the biggest sort of degrees of freedom and risk are, more volume flowing into this thing or more whatever, like as Adam was talking about. And so that sort of allows you to potentially even iterate and explore, hey, this is kind of the biggest risk or the biggest opportunity. Maybe if we can design this with extra overflow, we can accommodate additional industry, right? And these decisions just traditionally have been more of a professional judgment. And so just to kind of introduce, so what, which is a question that gets asked in infrastructure a lot.
And I want to underscore this because I think a lot of the things that I get to talk to my family and friends and people about on a day-to-day basis is basically things that people can't see. Basically what Adam said, right? I've built a whole career and around things that people can't see and touch, basically, right? You can go touch a data center, sure, but on a day-to-day basis, I can't walk into a store and see it, right? For example, and same thing is true with Adam. Same thing is true with you, Ilya, in critical infrastructure. We've sort of built a career around infrastructure, things that people can't see, but runs the world in many, many ways. And I think that's an important point. There's things that there's riches and niches is what I like to tell people, right? One, two, there's a lot of things that people have not touched in a very long time that are waiting for somebody with the grit and the know-how to come in and like really do something there where you can make tons of money doing it, but also have direct impact, right? Like Adam has happened. I don't think you have to make a trade-off and do one or the other. I think you can make money and do well at the same time. And anybody who tells you that's not possible, I don't know if I believe them. Okay. So because we are talking to a guy who's done it and has raised a Series B off the back of it. And I'd argue he's going to raise a Series C as well going forward, right? So I think that's an important point for our audience because we usually see the sexy things, the things that people talk about in the articles but we don't get to see infrastructure that much. And I think it's an important point for people to know that our lives depend on it, every single day. So it's an important point that I just want to underscore.
Yeah, just jumping in real quickly, over the past 120 years, when you look at power availability, water availability, generally just what we understood around the world, around how the world works. Society generally has developed and delivered a lot of both stable and reliable infrastructure. There's also been a lot of things that maybe we didn't realize we were doing, whether it's creating chemicals that are almost impossible to destroy, although we're kind of figuring it out, or, kind of burning things or introducing emissions into the world. We started the beginning of the 20th and late 19th century in a world of abundance, right? Whereas kind of human ingenuity can overcome anything, right? And in many cases, losing 30% of water was not that big of an issue if you assumed water was a sort of a resource that can never be exhausted. Right. And power similarly, like the distribution system in electricity, is leaky. It's the way that it's described. And in many cases, these utility poles are 60, 80, 100 plus, in some of the California fires, the metal members that failed were 80 or 100 years old, right? The actual metal had been stressed so much that it just failed, right? If you take a paper clip and bend it enough, it snaps. Well, that happens to bigger metal too. And so, timing in entrepreneurship is everything. What's interesting about sort of, and I'll get off my infrastructure tirade here in a second, but a lot of these, very bedrock of the things that when you flip the switch, you expect it to be on, have worked for 80, 100 years, right? And we need them to evolve and sort of go to a completely different level of capability that for the US at least, we haven't had to do since World War II. Right. And for the water system that we haven't had to do since, essentially the New Deal, right, because of property tax and other ways that these things are financed. And so, it's a lot of opportunity, but it's also a lot of sort of reimagining with a different view of what's possible. And so I just wanted to, especially when you talk about power, water, telecommunications, a little newer, but we're asking telecommunications to do completely new things. But a lot of these things have been on 99.999% of the time for a century. And we need them to be that and sustainable and adaptive and two-way. And we got to figure it out in, 10 years, right? And we just have to do a lot of things differently to achieve that. I just, all right, I'm done with my tirade, but I think that's an important frame when we talk about kind of utility level things.
We've talked about a lot of the good stuff. Adam. And before we let you go, and as we move into the next part of this, I want to know if there's any war wounds, right, or stories that you can share with our audience on this path to doing all the great things that you're doing now. Is there one or two stories that you could share with our audience that really like drives home sort of like you need to have resiliency, you need to have grit, you need to keep going, right? Despite these things in front of you, despite these other things, anything that you would share that you'd be open to sharing with our audience?
I mean, man, I could go on forever about this. I just had like literally 3-4 things hit me at once, and I'm trying to figure out which one I want to talk about. But the one I do want to mention, and this is instructive, sort of both like from a mental model point of view and how you deal with challenge in entrepreneurship, and also tactically. So when we sold our robotics company in 2018. Yeah, 2018, 2019. Right. Everything got sold off, all kosher, no issues, right? Like clean, packaged up, all good, whatever. I get a call from the state of California 2 years after the fact, maybe 3 years after the fact, claiming that I owe employment taxes for one of my early employees from a company that no longer exists because I misclassified that person as a contractor instead of an FTE. This is for a business that had been closed for 3 years at this point. There's literally no bank account. There's no money to pay anything. There's no nothing. And the state of California is chasing me for something that, by the way, was complete nonsense. I did not misclassify this person. That ended up being proven. So it was like, it ended up okay. But just think, you close, literally like close this chapter, close this part, like this book of your life, right? Expecting that all to be gone. You're focused on your next big thing. And all of a sudden the state is coming after you because of some crap that is just absurd. That's the kind of stuff you get hit with all the time. All the time. The things that you think you need to worry about inevitably never come to fruition. And the stuff that you're not worried about does. And you're like, what is going on? So you just got to be ready to fight, quite frankly, and be ready to just sort of take the lumps as they come, because you know they're coming, right? Nothing can ever just, you don't just ride off onto a pony into the rainbow and get your pot of gold at the end. That's just not the way it works. So I would just say for people, like, you're going to deal with tough shit. A lot of it is going to be stuff that you couldn't have anticipated happening. Keep your mission front of mind, keep your purpose front of mind, keep your why front of mind. Know that this is not a bug. These are features of the journey. This is how it works. You want to do anything good, you got to take risks. You got to deal with the crap. That's just how it is. And enjoy it for what it is, right? Even though it was a pain to deal with, I still learned a ton from the process. And I advise a lot of people now that are thinking about setting up shop, especially if it's in California, to think maybe, right, 10 times over why you want to do that and in that state as opposed to somewhere else, because it can be very challenging in many ways. That's just one example.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to ask you, you spent quite a bit of time at large companies. You've obviously done startups. What's kind of a misconception that one has, against the other, and vice versa? Because that's always, I've done a little bit of the same, and I've, they think they know, but they have no idea, as for some of the reasons we talked through. But I'm curious on your perspective here.
Yeah, I would think from the entrepreneur perspective, right? The big company, no one there is innovative. They're all bureaucrats, right? They don't want to change the way things are done. They're just comfortable sitting in their, their ivory tower, right? Working an hour a day and, taking these elaborate vacations and all this other stuff. Part of me is like, you know what? That's kind of true. But the other part of me knows that there are a lot of good people inside those companies, and they are innovative and they are willing to change things up. It just might take a little bit longer than what you're used to as an entrepreneur. So as long as you're willing to sort of put up with that stuff, you find the right champions, you find the people that do believe in your mission and what you're doing, and you can really deliver value to them, you'll get your deal over the line, or your pilot, or whatever it is you're trying to do. You'll get it over the line. It just may not happen as fast as you would like, because again, when you're that size of company, there's layers of approval. There's a lot of red tape. They're sort of in more of a like cover your ass than they are take risk situation. So a lot of their decision making is based off of, well, how much risk does this expose us to? So that's why you got to deal with lawyers, and you got to deal with procurement, and you got to deal, right? That's just the way the beast works. So for the entrepreneurs out there, don't think that every person that works for a big company is, sucks, because they don't. There are a lot of really good people. On the flip side, I think a lot of big companies are thinking like, these are just like, like a guy and a girl in a garage, flipping stuff together. They're just talking out of their ass. They don't know what they're doing, right? They're selling us on this big vision. They can't really execute, right? Like all these things inevitably go wrong, and I'm going to get fired if I, procure from this little rinky dink startup and all of that. There are startups out there that are like that. They are flying by the seat of their pants. They don't really have a product. They don't have a team, right? You will expose yourself to risk. But there are a lot of people out there that are repeat founders, or that really have their act together. They may have come from a company like yours, have spent time in your shoes, that get it. And they've solved the problem, and they have a real technology that's solving that pain point. And you got to take some time to listen to them, right? Just take the time to listen to them.
Such a good summary of these two worlds. As somebody sort of worked for a firm, as a partner at a firm who used to help large companies innovate, literally, we used to do this all the time. There's always somebody innovative inside these larger organizations, right? And at one point, the large organization was a startup that grew up to be a massive company. It's just that over time, they lose their entrepreneurial DNA, right? Because large companies optimize for efficiency, right? Not just speed. And this is where the systems, the processes, the red tapes, because when you don't have those things, bad things happen, and then they end up in the news. And a lot of people who are making a lot of money are very upset, which is why all startups have to grow up eventually, like Adam talked about, and put systems and processes in place, because it is the gates that you need to have in place to make sure bad things don't happen, and that things stay efficient as possible. And I just think it was well said to say that there are innovative people inside of large companies. I see it all the time, all the time. And we're going to have future people on the show and others that are in the pipeline who have spun companies out of very large companies, who have gone on to raise a lot of capital, right? And to do very important things. People forget that Expedia spun out of Microsoft technically in the early days, right? And a bunch of other companies actually. So I can go through a laundry list of companies who spun out of bigger companies. So talented people are there. And startup folks, they need big companies, and big companies need startups. And that's why we both exist in different worlds. But at some point, they just don't speak the same language. So, and you need to be bilingual. You need to speak startups and corporate. And Adam, you've spent time in corporations and you've spent time in the startup world. And I think that's a skill that a lot of people underestimate. Because if you've only done startups, you don't really have a clue how corporations function and how they work. And once you've been inside one, it's a lot of red tape to do this thing. It's a lot of red tape to become a vendor. You have to go through procurement hell, right? I mean, it's a lot of pain. And you have to get that to build a generational and lifetime company, to scale yourself. But it's very few people in the world who've been founders to scale themselves to be CEOs. Very, very few. Because at some point people realize it's beyond them to scale the company, and they had to go hire somebody else to do it. And who, not how, right? And how do we scale it to be the thing that I've always envisioned it being? And that might mean that I'm not at the top, but I've carried it as far as I can to help it grow up to what it is today. And I think that's the mature conversation that every great founder or CEO have to have with themselves and their board and everybody else. And yeah, man, I think you've underscored a lot of that today for sure. You've played 2X EIR, already, right? And you've done it well. Anything else that's not on the LinkedIn that you would share with people that you just want to get it from looking at your LinkedIn, things that you like to do in your spare time? Long-winded way to get to this question, but yeah.
Yeah. The thing I would say is that I don't think this is becoming as much of a myth anymore, or like a talking point, but people always talked about work-life balance. And I think it's bullshit. You have one life. You have the same 24 hours in a day as everyone else. you are fooling yourself if you don't think that work and life aren't inextricably intertwined, because time is time, right? It's not like, oh, well, this time is reserved for work and this is for life and this is for eating and this is for whatever. It's like, no, it's all part of the same pot. And so for me, I constantly reminding myself how I choose to spend my time is how I choose to spend my life. And so if I'm not sitting in front of my computer working, right, very intentional about spending it with my wife and with my daughter. We're also foster parents, so we spend time fostering children. We are also philanthropists, so spend a lot of time volunteering with various organizations. Like to spend time outdoors if I can. Big outdoors guy. And just, again, the reminder that like tomorrow's never guaranteed. All we have is right now. And so enjoy the moment while you can. And whether that's at work or whether that's with my daughter, if she's freaking out and stuff is going wrong in the house, right? This is part of the journey and you just got to enjoy it. So that's what I would say.
Man, I have to ask this follow-up question because I told you I did some digging. Do you think your love for the outdoors comes from sort of you being an Eagle Scout?
It's funny. In some ways, yes. I love you did that digging. Thank you for that.
No
in
worries.
some ways, yes. I definitely gained an appreciation for like living off the land in a sense, right? An appreciation for Mother Nature and everything she can provide. On the other hand, there was a probably the worst experience I've ever had in my life was when I was 14, 15 years old on a scout trip, and just hellish experience. I won't get into it now. And so I've also learned I hate hiking. That is one thing I will not do or would prefer not to do if I don't have to. So I, in that sense, I also sort of like just can't stand doing some stuff like that. So it's funny. It's a double-edged sword.
Amazing. So maybe to kind of bring us home here, you're sort of at this intersection of, AI infrastructure and maybe, following on my tirade, a once in a lifetime infrastructure transition. Can you talk us a little bit through kind of where your work in Transcend leads us? And then also maybe ways that kind of the EIR Live community can help and kind of connect with that work. And I think that would be sort of a good way to, as always, we can always keep digging, but I think that's a really good way to kind of bring us in and kind of connect the network to support your efforts here.
My vision is that our software could be used to design an entire city from scratch. So if we end up colonizing Mars or name your other next planet, exoplanet, the water systems, the power systems, the housing, the telco, the hospitals, everything a society needs to function, our software would be able to design at a conceptual level. You literally could just put in, here's how many people I think are going to live here. Here's the land that we have available to us. Here's some of the levers we want to pull from how we want the society to look or function or feel. Press a button and bang, like everything would be spit out. Your costs, your 3D renderings, all of your engineering data and documentation, everything is right there. So that's what I see a future. I see a future where our software is being used to design more resilient infrastructure, more sustainable infrastructure, more cost-effective infrastructure. You're going to pay less in taxes because we're doing more work up front to prevent all the catastrophic failures that are happening later on down the road. I think you're going to see a lot of people in utilities and engineering firms that are enjoying their lives a lot more because they're not worried about, dragging a picture around on a Word document for the 17th time, which is, we all know, is like the 7th layer of hell. Never works well. Let computers do that stuff so you can focus on the fun stuff. So that's the future I see. As far as this community goes, if you or someone works in a water or power utility or is an engineer for these systems or sells equipment into these projects, that could be breakers, transformers, pumps, pipes, I want to talk to them because chances are we can significantly help you either grow your business, cut costs, build better infrastructure. There's a whole lot there, but we sit right at the intersection of every major player in an infrastructure project. And I know that we can drive value. So I'd love to talk to you.
Amazing. And then just final, how can people connect and kind of follow your work?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. So Adam Tank on LinkedIn. You can go to adamtank.com for sort of the more personal side of things if you want. Either way, I try to respond to everyone, usually within 24 hours if I'm good about it. So please send a note. You'll be surprised how many times people offer this and it's crickets and it's crazy because most of the folks I know that, you think, oh, that person would never want to talk to me or, oh, they'll never respond. They'll respond in an instant. They love giving back. They love helping out. They love building that community. So please reach out.
We've come full circle. I think we leave it at that. I really appreciate the time and so happy to have you on the show and get to dig into, some of my favorite topics here.
Adam, I wish I could keep you for another hour, but I'm going to let you go. It's been an absolute privilege, my friend. Thank you for joining the podcast. I can't wait for this one to drop.
Likewise, guys. Thank you.
Man, I got to tell you, another incredible episode with Adam. So many gems. My head is going to be 10 times bigger after I record all these episodes with all the people. But two things that really stuck out to me about Adam's episode. One thing that I want to call out first, because I think is very the sort of noble of Adam. One, you can do well and do good at the same time. You don't need to sacrifice one for the other, right? And he's shown that throughout his entire career thus far, from the time he was in college, from the time to where he's at right now, being a CEO of a Series B and growing company. So, you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. And I think that's an important lesson for our founders and people listening to the episode to understand. And even now he's building a company that's basically helping, help with water, right? Around the world. And that's infrastructure for our lives, and still putting that in the fabric of everything that he's working on. The second thing is really around storytelling and strategic narrative, right? He's clearly very, very good at strategic narrative and getting that to resonate with different audiences. And there's a lot of evidence of that throughout the episode that he shared with us. And I'll save it for our audience to actually hear it. But I mean, the guy is clearly a born storyteller. And I won't say born storyteller. I'm sure it's a gift that he learned through debate and other things that he engaged with. But, what are the things that stuck out to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think picking up on the natural part is interesting. What was interesting to me specifically about it is the people around Adam notice that, he's the guy that can help him out. They before he was able to recognize it himself, people around him identified and sort of went out of their way to get his input, get his participation. And so he's like, oh yeah, it was just something I could do, right? It was something I was natural at, but obviously people around him knew it and connected with him. And so I think that's, saying that he's a natural is kind of a clear and easy thing to do. And I don't think it's probably a surprise to anybody that knew Adam when he was younger. I think the other thing is like when we asked Adam at the end of the day, where do you see all this going? He was pretty ambitious. He's like, let's design the whole city, the entire thing, kind of bottom up, all the systems, it could be that much better. And definitely no lack of ambition, right? Because the tools that he's building, you can very clearly tell he's excited about them. And we geeked out more than a little on infrastructure to the point where Adam even got me to, get on the infrastructure soapbox for a bit. But it was really interesting to sort of see that level of ambition and him get really excited about where that takes us. And I think finally, in all these episodes taken together, I love the sort of frameworks and concepts that we're kind of bringing up and putting forth. I think this idea of, collecting the dots and then connecting the dots, which in the original quote is, you read to collect, you write to connect, applied to sort of a career trajectory and really thinking about how do you even know what dots to collect. That was a really interesting sort of way to frame it and think about it. And so I think folks will enjoy the conversation. But there's a lot of gems in this episode. We had to kind of wrap it up a little faster than probably would have naturally been the case if we were in person having the conversation. But, it's amazing how much experience, depth, muscle memory is packed in such a short hour. So I'm really excited for folks to have a chance to take a listen for themselves.
Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrence Orr with my co-host Ilya Tabak, signing off. Let's keep building.